Hello everyone. Welcome to the Tim Booker channel. Wishing you all a pleasant listening experience. Today, I will interpret the essence of climate change in human history. The increasing concern about global climate change has complex and contradictory reasons. On the one hand, the historical predictions about climate change are being validated. Over the past 3 centuries following the Industrial Revolution, human society has greatly promoted economic growth but has also triggered unprecedented levels of pollution, energy consumption, and dramatic climate change. The interim report of the 2022 Global Climate Status by the World Meteorological Organization, WMO, shows that sea level rise has doubled since 1993, and in the past 2.5 years alone, sea level rise accounts for 10% of the overall rise since satellite measurements began nearly 30 years ago. It is estimated that the global average temperature in 2022 is approximately 1.15 degrees Celsius higher than the pre-industrial average from 1850 to 1900. Clearly, climate change is an urgent and pressing issue that cannot be ignored. According to a study published in the journal Science, even if countries reduce carbon emissions as promised, climate change may increase the frequency and intensity of El Niño events, leading to an estimated $84 trillion in global economic losses in the 21st century. Looking back at the evolution of climate change throughout history, the contradictory aspect lies in the challenge of addressing climate change. It requires a collective effort from the international community, making international cooperation more crucial than ever. Simultaneously, the differences in the industrial development foundations and processes of countries worldwide complicate the international distribution of climate change responsibilities, making it increasingly difficult to allocate tasks and promote cooperation. Climate change only recently transitioned from a research field to a policy and political issue, making historical research on climate issues a prerequisite for solving the problem of climate change in human society. Climate change in human history, from prehistory to the modern era, fills the gaps in climate research at both the methodological and conceptual levels. Similar literature includes French scholar Pascal Acot's History of Climate, published in 2011, and Climate Change and the Rise and Fall of Civilizations, by British scholar Brian Fagan and others in 2022. From a historical perspective, climate change has been slow, oscillatory, and cyclical, with ice ages and warm periods. However, in the industrial and post-industrial eras, the climate has been gradually warming, and this trend continues to intensify. Before addressing these complex and contradictory questions, it is essential to further explore the logic behind the formation of reality from the perspective of the history of human climate development. Without tracing the origins of this issue, it will be challenging to change the traditional thinking of human society when it comes to global climate change. It may be hindered by interest differentiation, consensus discrepancies, and ideological differences, thereby delaying climate change action. While Climate Change in Human History is not the only book that explores the history of climate change, it provides a fresh perspective on understanding the history of human climate change from a methodological and structural standpoint. The 2 authors of this book are Associate Professor Elizabeth Gordon in Earth Science at Indiana State University and Professor Benjamin Lieberman in History. They conducted this project as part of the Climate Change and Human History course. The book's introduction clearly outlines the research methods in science and history, aligning perfectly with the 2 scholars' research backgrounds. It paves the way for a methodological approach to the combined study of science and history in climate issue research. Traditional climate issue research typically focuses on significant historical phenomena and employs a top-down research approach, with narratives often downplayed and only serving as the foundation for historical research and development trends, lacking emphasis on climate issues. When discussing climate issues, it is essential to accurately perceive the natural evolution of climate change from biological and climatological perspectives and track the effects of human society's production, life, and technological innovation on climate change from a historical standpoint. This research in the book will have a positive impact and guide us to notice the positive effects of climate change and the details of climate history evolution. The importance of climate issues has been overlooked or sidelined, resulting in a relatively shallow foundation for current research in climate economics or green economics, making it difficult to address the long-term challenges of climate change and provide robust support for climate change policies. This book cites examples from the mid-20th century when the majority of scientists believed that human activities had little impact on climate change, or even considered the increase in carbon dioxide and the resulting climate warming to be beneficial. These perceptions might have been credible in their context or knowledge domain at the time, but today, many discussions about climate change may be erroneous or, at the very least, incomplete explanations. To this day, research on the processes, outcomes, and consequences of climate change remains controversial. Research texts provided by authoritative organizations or institutions have two main issues. Firstly, the book argues that records of the impact of climate change on human history are incomplete and unstable, making it challenging for researchers to gather more evidence. Secondly, the book contends that there are numerous factors in climate change, and it is necessary to clarify the concepts of external factors and internal processes and the effects and influences they generate. Therefore, the book's contribution lies in proposing a more comprehensive research approach to address these two major issues. The primary focus is on integrating knowledge from various fields such as astronomy, geology, and climatology from a climate science perspective to comprehensively understand climate change from prehistory to the present. This includes the growth and retreat of ice ages, air samples, and an examination of the interactions between climate and humanity across different time scales. It delves into the long-term effects of climate change on human evolution and early transformations while also considering the short-term effects and consequences on small-scale regions. Returning to a fundamental question, the spatial and temporal structure of climate change is a dynamic evolutionary process, implying that human societal activities have variability in their impact on climate change. Categorizing research helps grasp the scope, domains, and results of human activities at different times, influencing climate change. It also acknowledges the objectivity of climate change issues, i.e., the natural evolution of climate change and the impact of human activities that exacerbate or mitigate climate change. The book primarily divides climate issues into two main themes, reflecting the author's research methods. It categorizes climate problems at different times, helping readers gain a clearer understanding of the timeline of climate change while incorporating different aspects of human activities' impact on climate change. From the book's structure, it is evident that the relationship between climate issues and human activity is more like an interactive system. Human society, when adapting to climate change, influences climate change in turn through human production and lifestyle. Climate change also stimulates human society's increasing ability to address and resolve climate issues, such as the construction of infrastructure like water conservancy and coastal defense projects, as well as afforestation, which to some extent alleviates climate issues. In recent years, human society has become increasingly focused on climate change, proposing a series of initiatives and long-term plans to address global climate change. The author explains, from a scientific perspective, the interdependent relationship between human society and climate change, rather than merely criticizing the threat that human activities pose to climate change. In fact, climate change has had a significant impact on the development of human society. For example, the early melting of glaciers in the past was favorable for people's lives, providing an abundant water source. The book provides cases that balance the interaction between climate change and human society. The book not only dedicates a chapter to discussing human practical actions in response to climate change but also addresses the controversy surrounding climate change in the final chapter. That is, the strategies that humans adopt in response to climate change have both positive and negative effects. Without scientific guidance, even with a multitude of climate actions proposed by humans, these actions may have negative consequences. Climate issues are irreversible, and the core of addressing climate change lies in mitigating the trend and extent of climate warming but cannot alter the reality of climate change. Therefore, it is essential to recognize one key aspect: human responses to climate change cannot be overly idealistic. Actions that deviate from reality or science may only yield short-term effects in solving climate change issues. The book reveals the intricate relationship between history and science inherent in climate change issues. In 1992, over 150 countries of the United Nations, along with the European Economic Community, jointly signed and adopted the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. Its ultimate goal is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that prevents dangerous human interference with the climate system. This level should be achieved within a timeframe sufficient to allow ecosystems to naturally adapt to climate change, ensure food production is not threatened, and enable sustainable economic development. In 1997, the UNFCCC parties held the third meeting and formulated the Kyoto Protocol. Its objective is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that prevents severe climate change damage to humans. In 2015, 178 countries worldwide collectively signed the Paris Agreement, providing a unified framework for global climate action after 2020. As of March 2021, 194 countries and the European Union have signed the Paris Agreement, and 147 signatories have ratified it, demonstrating the widespread international efforts to combat global climate change. The international community has been engaged in addressing global climate change for 30 years, and it is evident that some progress has been made in these action plans. At least, there has been significant progress in establishing international consensus and promoting coordinated action. According to the latest report by the Climate Policy Initiative, CPI, public and private climate financing nearly doubled over the 10-year period from 2011 to 2020, with estimated climate financing in 2021 ranging from $850 billion to $940 billion, marking a 28% to 42% increase over the average levels of 2019 to 2020, reaching a historic high. However, to achieve the climate goals of the Paris Agreement, the world needs to increase climate investments at least sevenfold by 2030. Estimates suggest that the international community's substantive action against climate change still faces some real obstacles that need to be overcome in the future. Climate change is not just a scientific issue, it is also a policy issue involving international cooperation and multilateral coordination. From a historical perspective, while there is consensus within the international community to address global climate change, it also involves a fairness issue. Over the past 3 centuries of the Industrial Revolution, most developed countries have been beneficiaries of industrialization, urbanization, and globalization. At least until the mid-20th century, developed countries were the major consumers of fossil fuels like coal and oil. Currently, many developed countries have entered the post-industrial era and have transferred a significant portion of their production manufacturing chains to developing countries. This has led to developing countries bearing the harm from fossil fuels. Therefore, the international community faces a significant contradiction in the division of rights and obligations regarding climate change. Developed countries should take on more international responsibility, which means not only investing more funds in green and low-carbon transitions but also providing assistance to developing countries. The Global Climate Finance Report 2021, published by the Climate Policy Initiative, CPI, indicates that the growth rate of climate financing has slowed down in recent years. The CPI states that climate financing flows are far from meeting the estimated requirements. To achieve the internationally agreed climate goals by 2030 and transition to a sustainable, net zero emissions, and resilient world, annual climate financing needs to increase by at least 590%. For most developing countries still in the industrialization phase, industrialization remains the basis for promoting economic and social development. Pushing for green and low-carbon actions involves a greater cost. The lack of funds, technology, and human resources hampers the green transformation of developing countries. The international community faces 2 major challenges in addressing climate issues. First, a scientific recognition issue, as there have been repeated debates about how to set the limit for climate warming, and second, a distribution of interests issue. The prolonged climate negotiations are mainly due to practical disputes over cost-sharing and interest allocation. Balancing the costs between greenhouse gas-emitting countries of the past, present, and future is a significant challenge in addressing climate change. The retrograde actions of a few key countries clearly hinder the international community's efforts to combat global warming. The intention of this book is not only to discuss the history of climate change but also to inspire humanity to understand the climate change crisis. It advocates for people to discard historical, institutional, and cultural differences and collectively seek a future vision for human society. After all, the impact of the climate crisis extends beyond any one country or region. Returning to the realm of reality, given the paramount importance of addressing global climate change, can the current climate actions truly have a positive impact? The conflicts between different economic visions have magnified the profound implications of the choices humanity makes for the future. Countless people living in the world today will bear the consequences of the choices they make. While most countries are in the process of formulating medium to long-term decarbonization plans, such as carbon taxation systems, carbon pricing, and carbon emissions trading systems, these designs have their flaws, such as excessive focus on certain specific industries, potentially overlooking other production and lifestyle factors contributing to climate change. Addressing climate change should clarify two issues. First, institutional issues. Decarbonization actions involve a transformation of production and lifestyle, requiring alignment with economic and social development realities. They should utilize incentive and penalty mechanisms, balance policy and market considerations in the design of carbon trading and emissions reduction systems, and prevent token emission reductions. Second, technological issues. Due to the heavy dependence on fossil fuels in industrial production and modern lifestyles, seeking new energy alternatives will be a lengthy process. Strengthening the development and utilization of renewable energy sources such as wind and hydrogen represents a new exploration. Statistics show that global renewable energy consumption increased by 3.52% from 2015 to 2021, with an average annual growth rate of 14.2% in renewable energy generation from 2011 to 2021. Additionally, promoting the low-carbon transformation of traditional production also requires technological innovation. Therefore, taking global action against climate change should be grounded in the present while looking toward the future. The policy arrangements and investments of major countries worldwide are of paramount importance. Statistics indicate that over 130 countries and regions have currently set carbon neutrality goals, with most countries aiming to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Two key challenges lie ahead. First, the issue of energy transformation. Data shows that in 2021, global renewable energy generation has already increased to approximately 4 times the level of 1985, accounting for 28% of total global electricity generation, but the proportion of coal and natural gas generation remains close to 60%. It is evident that the global energy consumption still relies heavily on traditional fossil fuels, and uncertainties exist in the development of renewable energy in others, making global energy transition a challenging task. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, has stated in its 6th assessment that to keep global temperature increases below 1.5 degrees, the level of heat pollution must decrease by 60% from 2019 by 2035. Second, the issue of funding gaps. The World Energy Outlook 2022 report published by the International Energy Agency, IEA, states that to achieve the goal of keeping the global average temperature rise within 1.5 degrees Celsius as outlined in the Paris Agreement, global annual investments in renewable energy should reach $4 trillion by 2030. The United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, assessment indicates that the funding needs for climate adaptation in developing countries will surge to as much as $340 billion annually by 2030, but the current support amounts to less than 1/10 of that. In the future, major countries around the world need to assume more responsibility, increase investment in energy technology and the development of renewable energy, and provide more international assistance to underdeveloped countries and regions. Climate change in human history takes a multidisciplinary approach by combining climate science and historical research, incorporating fields like astronomy and geology. It demonstrates the climate conditions of various historical periods on Earth and elaborates on the new challenges brought about by industrialization and globalization. The significance of this book not only lies in scientific knowledge but also in providing a scientific assessment of climate change throughout human history, describing the interactive relationship between human life and climate change, and proposing an analytical method for the internal and external factors of climate change. This allows people to better understand the historical process, development context, and future prospects of climate change. It can be argued that addressing global climate change in the future should consider objective factors such as changes in the natural environment, human energy structure, and changes in production and consumption demands. These measures should be pragmatic and implemented step by step. In conclusion, addressing global climate change is vital to the future of humanity. Through this book, we might gain a more accurate understanding of the nature of climate change, which could inspire us to take action. The international community, governments, business organizations, investment institutions, and individuals should all participate and take coordinated actions as soon as possible. Thank you, and goodbye.